Hello and welcome to our first podcast. I'm Sam Phipps and today we're talking about how suppliers can crack the retail conundrum. I'm here today with Rob Crellin. Rob, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, thank you Sam. I'm hoping I can add some insight in this podcast today as I've had 14 years experience in manufacturing and supply chain. And in that time we've dealt with a number of major customers in the UK such as Hobbycraft, but also over my time in Europe we dealt with some large retail supermarkets. I'm sure you've all heard of Carrefour and Leclerc. So putting that together, I really hope to be able to add some insight into this.
So Rob, you've obviously been working in supply chain and manufacturing for a really long time. No doubt you're more than familiar with the challenges that come with satisfying the demand from retailers. So just briefly, why is it so important that you as a supplier get the retail demand right?
Well, simply speaking, for me, it really comes down to volumes. Dealing with retailers generally involves high volumes of product and therefore the potential for good profit from those volumes. But that's, of course, if you get it right, Sam. But if you don't get it right, that's when the problems really start coming up with retailers, because what I found in my experience is they tend to be very demanding.
So there's obviously a huge prize to chase when it comes to really managing that retail demand, but equally it comes with great risk. So one of the things you mentioned, Rob, was that retailers are very demanding. Is this something you could elaborate a bit more on, please?
Well, yes, retailers have a high expectation of product availability. And this is understandably so, because if the product is not available in their stores, then they'll almost certainly lose out on that sale to a competitor.
This is definitely something that we also see in research. Even in the best case scenario where a customer sees that the stock is not available and actually buys something else from the same store. However, this only probably happens 12% of the time. The worst case scenario, and actually the most common in the event of a stock out, is that the customer doesn't buy and actually goes and takes their business elsewhere. And for the retailer, a stock out situation will result in 64% of the time no sale.
And those scary statistics are only in the short term, Sam. If retail customers have a perception that a particular retailer regularly doesn't have the products that they want, then it won't be long before they permanently switch to a competitor. So the consequences are far more reaching.
So it's obvious that availability is king. However, what hurdles do suppliers face in satisfying these availability expectations?
As you would expect, there are many difficulties to contend with as a supplier. Picking the most difficult problems, I would say that this is mainly down to one, demand volatility, two, complex promotions that retailers tend to do, and three, the management of new products.
You mentioned demand volatility, but what do you actually mean by that?
Well, simply speaking, demand volatility refers to basically how you manage the unexpected higher sales that you basically were not expecting to receive. So simply speaking, if we believed, or if a retailer believed, that they were going to be selling around about 500 units a week, and they suddenly have demand coming in for 800 or 900 units, then it's how quickly can you react to fill the gap of those additional 300 to 400 unexpected units that the customers were trying to order.
And of course, I'm guessing that conversely, on the other side of things, is if a retailer is anticipating that they're going to sell 500 units in a week and they only end up selling 250, that actually you as a supplier are actually quite liable and left exposed to that excess.
Yes, of course, because what then tends to happen in that situation is that the retailer starts backing off on the orders that they are placing with us as the supplier, and therefore our stock starts to increase back in the warehouse, and then that also starts to bring into question, then do we need to be considering starting to back off on our production? Do we need to be therefore looking at the raw materials and components that we have coming in from our suppliers? Do we need to start backing down that demand? So it leads off to a whole chain of events for us as the supplier.
And this, of course, is before you even start thinking about the impact of promotions.
Yeah, and then to add on top of that, you've got the management of new products. The reason I mention this is because there are strong similarities between the management of items on promotion and for newly introduced products. In both of these cases, we as the supplier will need to work closely with the retailer to receive the anticipated forecast volumes in advance to ensure that we can gear up our manufacturing to have the stock available for when the retail customer expects to have access to it.
So, as a supplier, how do you manage the relationship with your retail customers effectively?
The simple answer to that is collaboration. That is building a strong relationship with your retailer and being open to sharing, to the sharing of information and ideas. For example, in my experience in dealing with our larger retailers concerning promotions, what we would do would be to get together, have a discussion around the products involved and the uplifted volumes, and part of those discussions would always involve the element of risk. So what contingency plan would we have in place should the sales be much bigger than everybody expected? So in this case, we would agree with the retailer to hold an additional amount of security or safety stock in the background. We would tend to hold this in raw material or component form, but with the expectation that we will convert this into finished product should the higher sales materialize. Part of the assessment of risk would be what would happen if the promotion was not successful, what would happen to this additional raw materials. So in this case, we would always upfront and ahead of the promotion analyze the write-off costs of specific components, for example, such as labels and outer packaging, and take that into account in the overall components that we would purchase for a promotion. Failing that, if the promotion was so successful that this was outstripped, then it was always kind of a good story to take back to the customer to actually say, look, the promotion has been that successful that we just haven't been able to keep up with demand. At that point then further meetings would be held to see what we could do as a supplier to recover, should we say, the normal standard situation.
So it's all about working together then. So it's all about sharing the right information and, most importantly, trying to anticipate the risk.
Yes, risks have traditionally been the white elephant in the room, in my experience. So if you can get these risks out on the table in advance, then both you, the supplier, and the retailer can work together to be prepared as much as possible to deal with the uncertainty of promotions. And of course, in working this way, then hopefully both you and the retailer, you as the supplier, and of course the retailer, can both be successful and bear a fruitful relationship.
So thank you, Rob, today for sharing your thoughts.
Thanks, it's been a pleasure to be here with you.
Today what we've been really looking at is, firstly, why the retail sector and why retail demand is so important to get right for suppliers. And then secondly, we've looked at some of the challenges that you as a supplier may face in terms of delivering the availability that's expected. And finally, we've talked a bit about how suppliers can ensure that these relationships are fruitful through collaborating effectively with their retail customers. Thank you for listening today, and watch out for some future podcasts we've got coming up. For more information about anything we've discussed today, please feel free to check out our website at slimstock.com.